Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall. I hope that you are excited to draw a conclusion to this series in Genesis that we have been doing this summer. To break the ice, I wonder if as a group you can draw Abraham's family tree. Abraham was married to, I'm not going to give you all the answers. Now I'll give you a pass. If you don't know the names of Jacob's 12 sons, we'll call that fair, but just that you would know that he had 12 sons. But practice as a group trying to draw Abraham's family tree. Many people have said that Genesis records the history of one family, but by the time we get to the end of Genesis, that family has gotten so big that we need a new book. And from now on, after we end Genesis, from Exodus on, we deal with a nation and not a family. Second icebreaker, just to get you talking. Has anyone ever used the leadership principle that I shared in my message on this last weekend called a bad news sandwich? That you put something good and something bad and then something good. I'll tell you, Claudia does this all the time when she talks to me about my messages. She tells me something nice and then the part that needs some correcting. And then she tells me something nice because she knows of my fragile male ego. Well, a study of Joseph can be a daunting task, and rightfully so, since he's the closest model to Christ in the entire Old Testament. He is the type, he is the example of Jesus Christ for us, all the way back in this first book. We want to understand our parents, we want to understand Jesus, we look to Joseph. Well, I chose to look at several different pericopes from chapter 37 all the way through chapter 50 to talk about Joseph. First is Joseph and his brothers. He's given this coat from his dad. Jacob gives him this coat. And let's round table this. Is this a good idea that Jacob gives Joseph this fancy coat? Do you think he would have given them this coat if Rachel had been around? Would Rachel have given him some different advice? Is it a bad idea? Next, in Genesis 37, Joseph is sharing with his brothers and his dad these prophetic dreams. I wonder what you think about this. He's sharing what he's learned. Scriptures say that, well, a lot of people say that the scriptures say that Joseph never did anything wrong. I wonder what you think about this. Is this a bad idea that Joseph shares these dreams? Maybe we wouldn't call it sinful that he shares these dreams, but we might not also call it wise that he shares these dreams. Maybe it wasn't the best thing to do, even if it wasn't a sinful thing to do. I wonder what you think. Is Joseph just being naive when he tells his brothers and his dad about these dreams? Or is this potentially a mistake? Well, we continue along in Genesis. We get to chapter 39 and we find our hero in Egypt, just like we find Jesus in Egypt in part of his story. God has moved him to the top of the ladder again. He was at the top of the ladder at his brothers. Now he's at the top of the ladder in Potiphar's house. I want you to notice Genesis 39. I want you to notice verse 9. In the midst of a pretty significant conflict, I want you to underscore, maybe even underline in your Bible, who is on Joseph's mind? Who is he most worried about? And who is on his lips? Who is he talking about? Next, in chapter 41, Joseph leaves prison. He moves to the top of the ladder again. He did move to the top of the ladder in prison as well, but he moves to the top of the ladder again, and now he is standing before Pharaoh. And I want you to notice chapter 41, verse 16. This is the king of the world for all practical purposes. This is the president of the United States, if you view us as the greatest power on the planet. And in verse 16, again, who is on Joseph's mind? Who is on his lips? Not just is he having some internal prayer conversation, but who is he talking about? And then next in chapter 45 of Genesis, Joseph's brothers have returned. Prophecy has been fulfilled. These dreams have been fulfilled. They've bowed to him. I want you to notice Genesis 45, verse 7, and look at it alone and answer the question, who is on Joseph's mind? Look at verse 8. Answer it alone. Who is on Joseph's mind? Look at verse 9 again. Answer who is on Joseph's mind. But in 7, 8, and 9, also who is on Joseph's lips. In the middle of this great drama, who's Joseph focused on? And then finally, in chapter 50, the very last chapter of Genesis, Joseph's beloved father has died, and his brothers are brought into his presence, And the gap, the safety measure that was between Joseph and his brothers has passed away. Maybe Joseph had spared their lives because he didn't want to deal with his father's wrath. Well, his father's gone now. And look at verse 20, chapter 50, verse 20. Again, who is on Joseph's mind? Who is on Joseph's lips? Every time there is drama, who is Joseph focused on? Where does it appear that Joseph's heart always is? I think it's beautiful. Well, every week I challenge you to talk about what you like and what you don't like and to share with your group. I like Joseph's story a lot, and I think that we all should. It is the example of what's going to come when Jesus comes. But I really like chapter 50, verse 20. In fact, to be perfectly honest with you, it's my favorite verse in all of Genesis. And it's the reason that I wanted to preach Genesis, because I love this verse. What you intended for evil, God used for good. And then I challenge you to think about what you don't like. I don't like Joseph's childhood arrogance. I mean, he's not like 4 when this happens, but he's, I think, being arrogant to some degree with his brothers. Every week, remind you of your application. This week, I'm challenging you and I'm challenging myself to put God first, to not be ashamed to speak his name, to not be ashamed to tell others in the midst of our highs and lows who's responsible for what's going on in our lives, that God is first. Well, I hope that I will see you next weekend as we start our study in the book of Acts. We looked at Luke, now we're going to look at Acts. These 2 books really were supposed to go together. They should have been called Luke Acts, the story of Jesus and his church. We're going to start that this next weekend. Please come. God bless.